Peter never imagined that his act of kindness in covering up his wife's infidelity would become a trap that would slowly destroy his self-respect and family relationships over the course of 2 years. At what should have been the happiest time of year, this devoted father of teenage daughters discovered that the woman he had provided for and protected was conducting a secret affair that would challenge everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the possibility of redemption in marriage. The first crack in Peter's seemingly stable family life appeared just before Christmas 2019, during what should have been a season of togetherness and celebration. His wife Margaret announced that she was going to visit a friend for a simple cup of tea, a claim that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but would soon be revealed as the beginning of a pattern of deception that would define the next phase of their marriage. The casual nature of Margaret's announcement about visiting a friend didn't immediately raise red flags for Peter, who had spent years building trust with his wife and believing in the strength of their family unit. However, something about the situation seemed slightly off to one of their teenage daughters, demonstrating the intuitive awareness that children often have about family dynamics even when adults are trying to maintain appearances. Peter's daughter's decision to check her mother's location using phone tracking technology revealed the first concrete evidence of Margaret's deception. Instead of being at a local friend's house having tea, Margaret was 50 miles away in a restaurant, clearly engaged in something far more significant than the casual social visit she had described to her family. The discovery that Margaret was not where she claimed to be created an immediate crisis of trust within the family. Peter was forced to confront his wife with evidence of her deception, asking if she wanted to tell him anything about her actual whereabouts and activities. This moment represented the first of many times Peter would give Margaret the opportunity to come clean about her behavior. Margaret's response to being caught in her first lie revealed both her quick thinking and her willingness to create elaborate deceptions to cover her tracks. She claimed that she was secretly trying to buy Peter a wonderful Christmas gift, attempting to transform her deception into an act of love and thoughtfulness for her husband. However, Margaret's explanation fell apart under even basic scrutiny. The village where she claimed to be shopping had no retail establishments that could justify a 50-mile journey for gift purchasing. This obvious flaw in her story should have been a clear indication that she was fabricating her explanation. But Peter's desire to believe his wife may have prevented him from pushing harder for the truth. Have you ever caught someone in a lie that was so obviously false that you wondered if they thought you were stupid? How do you respond when someone you love insults your intelligence with clearly fabricated explanations? The day following the confrontation about her whereabouts, Margaret escalated her confession strategy by providing a partial truth that was designed to satisfy Peter's concerns while still concealing the full extent of her deception. She admitted that she had stupidly agreed to meet this guy for a drink, presenting it as a momentary lapse in judgment that she immediately regretted. Margaret's confession was carefully crafted to minimize the significance of her actions while positioning herself as someone who recognized her mistake and felt genuine remorse. She claimed to understand what a mistake it was and expressed desperate sorrow about her decision to meet another man, hitting all the emotional notes that might encourage Peter to forgive and move past the incident. This partial confession represented a classic manipulation tactic used by cheating spouses who have been caught in deception. By admitting to a lesser wrongdoing while concealing the true extent of their betrayal, they attempt to satisfy their partner's need for honesty while still maintaining their affair. Margaret was essentially controlling the narrative of her infidelity disclosure.
Peter's response to Margaret's confession revealed his fundamental decency and his desire to preserve their family unit. Rather than immediately assuming the worst or demanding extensive details about her relationship with this other man, Peter appeared to accept her explanation and expressions of remorse, giving her the benefit of the doubt that many betrayed spouses extend to their cheating partners. The 6 months that followed Margaret's first confession should have been a period of rebuilding trust and demonstrating genuine change in her behavior. However, instead of using this time to recommit to her marriage and family, Margaret apparently continued her relationship with the other man while becoming more sophisticated in her deception techniques. Margaret's decision to change her email accounts and passwords during this period was a significant red flag that should have alerted Peter to ongoing deceptive behavior. These actions indicated that Margaret was not interested in transparency and rebuilding trust, but rather in better concealing her continued infidelity from her husband and family.
The discovery that Margaret was spotted with the same man again 6 months after her initial confession and promise to end contact revealed that her expressions of remorse and regret had been entirely false. She had used the intervening months not to work on her marriage, but to continue her affair while improving her ability to hide it from her family.
When someone promises to change their behavior after being caught cheating, what actions should they take to demonstrate genuine remorse? How long should you wait to see evidence of real change? Margaret's response to being caught a second time followed the exact same pattern as her first discovery, with identical expressions of sorrow and regret. This repetition revealed that her emotional responses were calculated performances rather than genuine remorse, designed to manipulate Peter's compassion and buy her more time to continue the affair.
The fact that news of Margaret's infidelity was spreading through their social circles added another layer of humiliation and complexity to Peter's situation. Instead of allowing the natural consequences of Margaret's actions to unfold, Peter made the decision to protect his wife's reputation by creating a cover story that painted her as a victim rather than a perpetrator. Peter's decision to concoct a story about Margaret being harassed by an unwanted suitor demonstrated his instinct to protect his family's reputation and his wife's dignity, even at the cost of his own emotional truth. This protective behavior, while well-intentioned, enabled Margaret's continued deception by shielding her from the social consequences of her actions. The cover story that Peter created transformed Margaret from someone who was choosing to have an affair into someone who was being pursued against her will. This narrative shift allowed Margaret to maintain her social relationships and reputation while continuing to deceive Peter about the true nature of her relationship with the other man. By protecting Margaret from the social consequences of her infidelity, Peter inadvertently created conditions that made it easier for her to continue the affair. She no longer had to worry about damage to her reputation or relationships, as Peter had essentially taken responsibility for managing the social fallout from her actions. The most recent discovery in Peter's ongoing ordeal came through his daughters, who had apparently become unwitting monitors of their mother's behavior. One of Peter's teenage daughters discovered that Margaret had received personal messages with love hearts and other romantic indicators, suggesting that the affair was not only continuing, but becoming more emotionally intimate. When confronted about these messages, Margaret's immediate response was to blame the communications on someone else, specifically one of their friend's children. This explanation was so obviously implausible that it insulted the intelligence of everyone involved. Yet it demonstrated Margaret's reflexive tendency to lie when faced with evidence of her deception. The family's demand to see Margaret's phone created a physical confrontation that highlighted how far the trust in their household had deteriorated. Margaret's resistance to showing her communications was so strong that Peter's daughter had to physically grab the phone to access the evidence, revealing the extent to which Margaret was willing to fight to protect her deception. How do you handle it when someone's lies become so obvious that they're insulting your intelligence? What does it mean when family members have to physically fight to access basic truth? The messages that were discovered on Margaret's phone provided definitive proof that her affair was ongoing and that all of her previous expressions of remorse and promises to end contact had been lies. The evidence was clear and undeniable, leaving no room for misinterpretation or alternative explanations. Margaret's decision to stay at a friend's house following the phone discovery represented both an escalation of the family conflict and another opportunity for her to continue spinning false narratives. Even when faced with indisputable evidence of her ongoing deception, she maintained that the other man had contacted her out of the blue, attempting to portray herself as a passive recipient of unwanted attention. This latest lie revealed the depth of Margaret's commitment to maintaining her deception, even when the evidence clearly contradicted her claims. Her willingness to continue lying in the face of obvious proof demonstrated either a complete disconnection from reality or a sociopathic level of manipulation that showed no regard for her family's emotional well-being. Peter's question about whether people ever change reflected his growing recognition that Margaret's pattern of behavior was not the result of temporary poor judgment, but rather indicative of fundamental character issues that might be resistant to change. After 2 years of repeated discoveries and false promises, he was beginning to understand that Margaret's problem was not a single mistake, but a consistent pattern of deception and betrayal.
The fact that Peter described himself as a nice guy who would provide for his family and would be classed as one of the good guys revealed his confusion about why someone he had treated well would repeatedly betray and deceive him. This self-reflection highlighted the common belief among betrayed spouses that good treatment should prevent infidelity, when in reality, cheating is typically about the cheater's character rather than their treatment by their spouse. Peter's recognition that he cannot spend the rest of his life going through this negative toxic relationship represented a crucial breakthrough in his understanding of his situation. After 2 years of giving Margaret chances to change and seeing no genuine improvement, he was beginning to recognize that continuing to accept her behavior would be destructive to his own well-being and that of his daughters. The involvement of Peter's daughters in monitoring and discovering Margaret's deceptions added another tragic dimension to the situation. These teenage girls were being forced to act as investigators of their mother's behavior, creating a dynamic that was unfair to them and potentially damaging to their understanding of healthy relationships and trust. The fact that even Peter's daughters were a bit surprised that he was still with Margaret after all her deceptions revealed how obvious Margaret's lack of genuine remorse and change had become to everyone in the family. His own children could see that their mother was not demonstrating the kind of behavioral changes that would justify continued trust and reconciliation. When your own children can see that your partner is manipulating and deceiving you, how do you balance protecting them from adult problems with modeling healthy relationship boundaries? Peter's love for both his wife and children created a complex emotional situation where his desire to preserve the family unit conflicted with his need to protect himself and his daughters. This internal conflict is common among betrayed spouses, who must choose between their hope for reconciliation and their need for self-respect and emotional safety.
The pattern that had emerged over 2 years showed that Margaret's responses to being caught were consistently the same: initial denial, followed by partial confession, expressions of remorse, promises to change, and then a return to the same deceptive behavior. This cycle had repeated multiple times with no genuine behavioral modification, suggesting that Margaret either could not or would not change her approach to the marriage. Peter's question about whether anyone had been through similar and had it work out well reflected his desperate hope that his situation might be salvageable despite all evidence to the contrary. This hope, while understandable, also demonstrated how difficult it can be for betrayed spouses to accept that some relationships cannot be repaired, especially when children and years of investment are involved. Professional counselors who work with couples dealing with infidelity emphasize that successful reconciliation requires the cheating partner to take complete responsibility for their actions, demonstrate genuine remorse through changed behavior over time, and commit to complete transparency. Margaret had shown none of these characteristics, instead doubling down on deception and manipulation with each discovery. The 2-year timeline of repeated discoveries and false promises represented a pattern that was unlikely to change without serious intervention. Margaret had been given multiple opportunities to demonstrate genuine remorse and behavioral change, but instead had used each chance to refine her deception techniques and continue her affair with greater sophistication. The impact on Peter's teenage daughters could not be understated. They were witnessing their mother's repeated betrayals of their father, her willingness to lie to the family, and their father's struggle to balance love and self-respect. This exposure to marital dysfunction and deception could have lasting effects on their understanding of healthy relationships and trust.
Peter's role as the family provider and protector made his situation particularly painful, as he had fulfilled his traditional responsibilities as a husband and father, only to have those commitments exploited by someone who is not reciprocating his dedication and loyalty. This dynamic is common in cases where one partner takes their role seriously while the other pursues selfish interests without regard for family consequences. The social aspect of Margaret's affair, with news spreading through their circles of friends, added public humiliation to Peter's private pain. His decision to create a cover story had temporarily protected Margaret's reputation, but it also prevented their social network from providing him with the support and validation that he needed during this difficult time. Is it ever worth protecting the reputation of someone who is actively betraying and humiliating you? How do you balance family privacy with the need for honest support from friends? The evolution of Margaret's deception techniques over the 2-year period showed a concerning pattern of escalation rather than remorse. Instead of becoming more honest and transparent after each discovery, she had become more sophisticated in her lies and more resistant to accountability, suggesting that she viewed the discoveries as problems to be solved rather than wake-up calls for behavioral change. Peter's question about whether people ever change reflected a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of change in the context of repeated betrayal. While people can certainly change, meaningful change requires genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing, authentic remorse, and sustained effort to rebuild trust through consistently different behavior over time. Margaret had demonstrated none of these prerequisites for genuine change.
The physical confrontation required to access Margaret's phone revealed how far their family relationships had deteriorated from normal marital trust. In healthy relationships, partners don't need to physically fight to access basic honesty from each other. The fact that a teenage daughter had to grab her mother's phone to reveal the truth showed how toxic the family dynamic had become. Margaret's willingness to blame romantic messages on one of their friends' kids demonstrated a level of desperation in her lying that bordered on the absurd. This explanation was so obviously false that it revealed her complete disconnection from reality, or her assumption that her family members were too naive or loyal to challenge even the most ridiculous claims. The pattern of Margaret staying at friends' houses after each discovery created additional instability for the family, particularly for the teenage daughters who were watching their mother repeatedly abandon the family home rather than take responsibility for her actions. This behavior modeled avoidance and escape rather than accountability and commitment to working through problems. Peter's description of their relationship as negative and toxic after 2 years of repeated betrayals and deceptions represented a crucial recognition that the marriage had become fundamentally unhealthy for everyone involved. This acknowledgement was an important step toward recognizing that some situations cannot be repaired through patience and forgiveness alone. The fact that Margaret continued to receive romantic messages with love hearts and personal content indicated that her affair had progressed beyond casual meetings to an emotional relationship that competed directly with her marriage. This level of emotional investment in someone outside the marriage suggested that her commitment to reconciliation with Peter was likely superficial at best. When someone has repeatedly lied to you over years, how do you distinguish between temporary poor judgment and fundamental character problems? What evidence would you need to believe that genuine change was possible?
Peter's situation illustrated the common trap that many betrayed spouses fall into: the cycle of discovery, confrontation, temporary remorse, false hope, and repeated betrayal. Breaking this cycle requires the betrayed spouse to recognize that they cannot control or change their partner's behavior, only their own responses to it.
The involvement of Peter's daughters as both witnesses and participants in uncovering Margaret's deceptions created a complicated family dynamic where the children were forced to choose between protecting their father and maintaining loyalty to their mother. This situation put unfair pressure on the teenagers and potentially damaged their relationship with both parents. Margaret's consistent choice to prioritize her affair relationship over her family responsibilities, even when repeatedly caught and confronted, demonstrated where her true loyalties lay. Her actions spoke much louder than her words, revealing that despite her expressions of remorse, she was not willing to sacrifice her outside relationship for her family's well-being. The question of whether Peter could ever get past a cheating wife was complicated by the fact that Margaret was not just a cheating wife, but a consistently deceptive one who had shown no genuine signs of wanting to change her behavior. Getting past infidelity is possible when the cheating partner demonstrates authentic remorse and sustained behavioral change, but Margaret had shown neither. Peter's recognition that he was one of the good guys who had provided well for his family represented an important step in understanding that Margaret's behavior was not a reflection of his inadequacy as a husband, but rather a manifestation of her own character issues and choices. This understanding was crucial for his self-esteem and future decision-making. The 2-year timeline of repeated betrayals and false promises had created a clear pattern that was likely to continue unless Peter made significant changes to his responses. Margaret had learned that she could continue her affair as long as she was willing to endure periodic confrontations and offered temporary expressions of remorse.
The impact of Margaret's behavior on their teenage daughters extended beyond the immediate family crisis to potentially affect their future relationships and understanding of marriage. They were learning that adults could repeatedly lie to people they claimed to love, that promises could be meaningless, and that some people prioritize their own desires over family stability. Peter's love for his wife and children, while admirable, had become a vulnerability that Margaret exploited to continue her deceptive behavior without facing meaningful consequences. His protective instincts and desire to preserve the family had inadvertently enabled her continued betrayal by shielding her from the natural results of her actions. The question of whether their situation could, quote, work out well required honest assessment of Margaret's demonstrated pattern of behavior rather than hope based on her words. After 2 years of consistent deception, following multiple discoveries and confrontations, the evidence strongly suggested that Margaret was not genuinely interested in changing her behavior or recommitting to her marriage. Ultimately, Peter's situation demonstrated that getting past a cheating spouse requires the cheating partner to do the work of genuine change and redemption. When that partner consistently chooses deception over honesty and affair relationships over family commitments, the betrayed spouse must decide whether to continue enabling destructive behavior or to prioritize their own well-being and that of their children by establishing firm boundaries and consequences.